All right. So today's presentation is going to be on lifecycle cost analysis and specifically FORMAF. So the intention of this presentation is to walk everyone through how you actually fill out the FORMAF tool. Next slide, please. So, this slide I know kind of comes up in every single presentation here, but it's really trying to hit home all the different mission areas and focuses that Commerce has and different areas where we touch the community, from housing and homelessness to infrastructure, broadband, small business assistance, obviously energy and where we work through. But the big thing is that Commerce's main focus here is strengthening communities. Next slide, please. This is a general overview of the Commerce staff and our staffing plan here. And if anyone here has worked with Commerce over the last several years, you'll recognize that there have been a lot of new additions, myself included. And so this is just a general view of what the staffing plan looks like currently. Next slide, please. Okay, today's agenda. So there's a lot on the agenda, even though this list doesn't appear to show that. But what we're going to be walking through is a general idea of what FORMAF is, the data requirements for filling out FORMAF, so the things that you should have on hand that will help make filling out FORMAF much easier. I'm also providing in this slide some example data that will feed into the FORMAF that I'm filling out today. I think many of you may already have a copy of that FORMAF if you checked your email this morning. We will be providing the copy of that as well after the presentation whenever we post the slides as well. So for the FORMAF walkthrough, we'll be going over the capital cost, so initial cost, O&M, periodic major maintenance, incentives, the energy use data, which goes into the utilities tab, delayed implementation, as well as the overall LCCA summary tab. After that, we'll have Q&A, and we'll talk a little bit about support resources and our upcoming events. Next slide, please. So one thing I want to note, I think because of the technical nature of this presentation on questions, if you have questions, please enter those questions into the chat. We will be doing a short Q&A after each tab. There's roughly 4 key tabs that we need to go through. Some have a lot more information than others, and so I think it makes more sense to take a quick little break after we finish up talking about one of the tabs to allow questions on that specific tab. For question structure, which I think will be really helpful, is if you can you identify which tab your question is related to and what section in that tab your question is related to? And this will make a little bit more sense as we actually get into the form. You'll see the different section titles. And also recognizing that given the nature of lifecycle cost analysis, there may be some fairly complex questions that come up. We'll do our best to answer the questions in chat as we can. However, for those more complex questions, it may be something where we need to respond, after this presentation through our Q&A submission in order to provide more detail. I would rather give people the right answer than the quick answer. Also, if there are any additional questions that maybe require a demonstration, I'm more than happy to go through and do another video recording that actually shows how to enter the data if it is related to data entry in FORMAF itself. Next slide, please. Okay, so Clean Buildings Performance Standard. It's based on ASHRAE Standard 100. And really for today, with the investment criteria, we're looking at the Tier 1 buildings. Tier 2 does not include an investment criteria requirement or a Clean Buildings Performance metric. Next slide, please. So once again, these are the different Tier 1 basic requirements. Today's presentation is really solely focused on the investment criteria component, as the investment criteria does require a level 2 ASHRAE energy audit, as well as a life cycle cost analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, roles and responsibilities. So today's audience really, a lot of what this presentation is going to be focused on is information that, the qualified energy auditor and whoever's doing the life cycle cost analysis, like those are the main audiences here. But that's not to discount the qualified person or the energy manager as well. As you may be aware, life cycle cost analysis for Clean Buildings Performance Standard isn't done in a vacuum. You're also developing and implementing an O&M plan and an EMP as well, in addition to benchmarking. And a lot of the information that's found in your O&M plan and EMP will feed into the audit and feed into this life cycle cost analysis component as well. Next slide, please. So this is a general outline and structure of the way the standard is built out. Today's focus is really going to be on normative NXX, which details the requirements of investment criteria, and that specifically includes requirements related to life cycle cost analysis and Form F. Next slide, please. All right, so what is Form F? Well, to explain what Form F is, first you have to understand the requirements in normative NXX. So it states all energy efficiency measures identifying the energy audit shall be evaluated for cost effectiveness in accordance with normative NXX. This process identifies an optimized bundle of EEMs that provide maximum energy savings without resulting in a savings to investment ratio of less than 1. What Form F is the tool that you use to effectively conduct a life cycle cost analysis. So it's where you put your EEMs to develop your optimized bundle that has that savings to investment ratio, or SIR, of equal to or greater than 1. And those optimized bundles that are equal to or greater than 1 would be considered cost effective and would need to be implemented. Next slide, please. Okay, data requirements for Form F. So off on the right-hand side, I provided some data sources where you may be locating or you're utilizing in order to fill out these capital costs, the energy use, and the measure life. I want to make it really clear here that this list of data sources is really intended to be including but not limited to. There may be other data sources and other requirements that you may have for your specific project. But keenly, there's 3 key components. There's the capital cost, which includes the base case and alternative measure cost. For the base case, that's where there's a code minimum or like-for-like replacement. You would need to have that capital cost component to it. The O&M cost, also for base case and alternative. Any periodic major maintenance, if applicable, and I'll explain this a little bit when we get to the form, and any incentive or tax rebates. For energy use, you would need to have your base case energy use based on, technically like a year of energy reporting data, and that would show both the amount of energy use, so if it's kilowatt hours or therms, and your actual cost. For the alternative, you would have your energy use projections, so what do you expect your energy use and energy use cost to be when the EEMs are implemented. For measure life, there are, I would say, two components to this: the expected useful life of the EEM and the remaining useful life of the existing equipment. The expected useful life of the EEM applies both to the base case and the alternative. So if you have a code minimum or like-for-like replacement as part of your base case scenario, you need to have the expected useful life of that replacement. So if it's 5 years, 10 years, et cetera. The remaining useful life of existing equipment is also key because that will tell you when the equipment is getting replaced in the base case scenario. And obviously, there's also any years of delay for phased implementation. All right, next slide, please. So this slide represents the data that is fed into the example in Form F that I'm going to walk through and that's provided. Someone really graciously offered to provide some of this data to us. Not all the data was available that I needed in order to develop the example. So if you see any really nice, neat round numbers, those are likely data points that I had to come up with in order to develop the example. And for today's example, we're going to have 3 EEMs: a lighting upgrade, an HVAC controls upgrade, and a boiler upgrade along with the connection cost. I also want to point out that the dollars per kilowatt hours and dollars per therm are based on Bureau of Labor Statistics, May 2024, Seattle Tacoma averages. Those rates are obviously going to vary depending on where you're located in the state and what your utility provider charges you. All right, next slide, please. All right, so we're going to start moving over to the Form F walkthrough, and I will share my screen. All right, let me move this over a little bit, and hopefully everyone can see this. And anyone on Commerce, if there's any issues seeing this, let me know.
Hey, James, I just want to mention to the audience that you should have received an email with this example walkthrough. If not, Judy has just put a link. So if you wanted to take a look at that on a separate screen.
Okay. All right, so make sure everyone's seeing here this Getting Started tab showing up first here. I would highly recommend that anyone who's going to fill out a Form F really dig into this Getting Started tab. It does provide a walkthrough of how to fill out Form F in a basically screenshot type format for each section. Um, just to note too, the format that's been provided and that I'm walking through today has been modified in that I've included some additional comments and a little bit more direction in some of the other tabs to hopefully make it a little bit clearer for folks as they're filling this out. So it is a little different than what you'd see if you downloaded it directly from the Clean Buildings website, namely just because of those additions that I included to help as an example. So like I said, the first tab you really want to take a look through is this Getting Started tab, because it does provide a walkthrough and a brief explanation of what the data requirements are and how to fill out the form. So next, we're going to move over to the General Info tab. This one is pretty clear in that you have your general project information that you need to fill out. So it'll be your state building ID, portfolio manager ID number, project name, address, etc. As a random little factoid not related to this, if anyone's interested, or at least this is what I've been told, the most common street name in America is Second Street. I know some folks typically guess First Street or Main Street, but a lot of towns have a First Street and or Main Street, but many of them at least have a Second Street. All right, kind of random. Let's move on. So the next piece is your qualified energy auditor information. So basic company name, contact number, email. The component that you really want to take a look at too here under key variables is this drop-down box for private public. This is a section where you set whether or not you're a private building or a public building. And the reason this matters is because it does impact the nominal discount rate. So if you're public, you notice that the nominal discount rate is lower. The nominal discount rate for public building projects is mandated through OFM, whereas the private sector nominal discount rate is based on Wall Street Journal's prime rate over a 12-month average. This here is your base year piece, so I want to make sure that it's generally your current year. The section below here, and these are some of the notes that I added for folks just to help explain some of these sections. But this section here is for financing. So if you are needing to finance the project, this is where you would enter in the information. There's a drop-down box here. You would click yes. It'll also give you a note here that tells you that you should be using the same assumptions for both the alternative and baseline. So if you're assuming that you're going to have to finance the alternative, you should also include that assumption for the baseline in order to keep things apples to apples in terms of comparison. So you'd put your down payment percentage, the term in years, and then the nominal interest rate. And the nominal interest rate should be the advertised or stated interest rate for the loan. I don't know what construction lending looks like right now, but I know that I think the 30-year mortgage rate right now is like 6.9%, which, yeah, seems crazy. All right, I think that's it for this tab. Not sure if we had any questions at all.
No current questions in the chat, James.
Okay, perfect. All right, we'll move over to the Form F Capital tab. All right, this tab,
James, just so
yeah,
you know, your notes are only partially viewable.
yeah, I kind of figured that was going to be the case. I worry a little bit. I don't want to drag this out because I think it'd be really hard to see.
That's fine.
Yeah, and I'm going to be going over the notes anyway. And like I said, this form will be provided to folks, so they'll be able to have this. But I want to make sure folks can see the tabs here as I'm going through. So the first thing you have in your capital tab, which really is your cost tab, is your baseline. So you provide a project description, and then for each EEM, you would enter in your EEM title, and you can label this EEM 1, 2, 3, or whatever you need. You have your implementation cost, your life in years, and your remaining life in years. And what this represents is, for the implementation cost, is your full measure cost. So once again, if you have a like for like or code minimum replacement, that should be captured in your implementation cost for your baseline. The life in years represents your measure life. So this is how long this measure is going to last once implemented. And this should be based on industry standards. Commerce will be publishing a table for this for reference. And the last thing here is the remaining life. The remaining life is the existing remaining life of the equipment that's on the ground currently. So If you already have a boiler installed, what this is saying is that your existing boiler has 5 years before it needs to be replaced. When you replace it, you'll replace it with this boiler, which will cost $1 million in this example, and this new boiler will last 24 years. That's basically what all this data is spelling out. One thing to note too, and I've been asked this a few times, is maybe there's not enough rows for you. I provide a little bit of an explanation off here on the right, but to show you, you can add additional rows. So if you see this filter function over here in cell A1, you click on it. You see this X over here, you click on that, hit OK, and it will populate additional rows. Currently, this is set to really only hold 10 rows. If you find yourself in an instance where you need more than that, if you can contact Commerce, send us an email or a customer support ticket and let us know, we can create a special format that has the additional number of rows that you need. We can send that over to you. I'm going to go ahead and unfilter this so it makes it a little easier to scroll through. Okay. The next piece of cost information is baseline annual maintenance and other annual non-utility costs. So this should be your lump sum O&M for all of your measures or all of your EEMs here. And this is, like I said, your annual O&M. The line below here is for periodic major maintenance expenses. So these are non-annual recurring expenses. You put the title here, the cost, and then the period or number of years. So this is how often it recurs. So if you have a sophisticated system that has, let's say, multiple subsystems that are required to be maintained or replaced every so often, this is where you would include that as baseline periodic major maintenance for your project. Okay. Next section is going to be your alternative. All right, so in here you have your project description. And one of the really key variables here is this highlighted in green. It represents the useful life of your equipment per measure with the longest life, which is kind of a mouthful there. What this is basically saying is that from the EEMs that you develop as alternatives, you take the one or ones, if they have the same measure life, that has the longest life, and you enter that data here. What this is doing is this is setting the period of analysis for your life cycle cost analysis study. And for that EEM, you move into this section, which is a cost of implementing bundle of measures. Please note that this is really intended for your longest life measure. This top section is, and we'll get into the bottom section below. If you have multiple EEMs that have the same measure life and they happen to be the longest measure life, you can roll that up. And going back up here to show you, once again, you can drop this down and it does increase the number of rows that you have for data entry. So again, I'm going to close that. So in this case, the measure that had the longest measure life is the boiler upgrade and connect for your alternative. And so it included the project description, the amount, and the life. The years of delay function. In some instances, you may want to have delayed implementation. And where this really ties into, if you scroll up above here, like for this boiler upgrade and connect, let's say, for example, instead of replacing in year 1, which is the way it's set currently, you wanted to delay it by 5 years. So that way you're replacing the boiler once the existing boiler is no longer serviceable or useful. You would put that 5-year delay here. So you put 5 here. Do note that we have received notification that there are some issues with the delayed energy cost savings piece, which we'll get into in the utilities tab next. We are currently working through that right now. So if you are trying to enter in years of delay or delayed implementation, the form is not currently working the way it is intended to. We are working to fix that. And as soon as we have that fixed, we will let everyone know. We'll send out an email notification. If you are a user who is currently trying to enter years of delay and you need this form as soon as possible, if you can send us an email, send us a message or a customer support ticket, once we have this delayed energy cost savings matter fixed, we can send you a form directly. All right, I'm gonna move down. If you look at these, there's a few different ways of enter this data. I have a lump sum rolled up cost for this measure. You can actually go through and itemize this measure with commissioning, utility service upgrades, all these different cost factors, but it's completely fine to just have a lump sum rolled up cost as long as that cost considers all these line items where applicable. So if you scroll down here, this section are for measures that have useful lives different than the study period, so less than the period of analysis. And so in this case, our lighting upgrade and HVAC controls upgrade have a life that is less with 15 and 16 years. Do note that for measures that have a shorter than longest measure life, it will repeat in the period of analysis, particularly if there's no delay. So what I'm saying here is our period of analysis is 24 years. This lighting upgrade has a life of 15 years. If you install this in year 1, in year 15, actually going into year 16, this will be repeated over the period of analysis. So that's why like setting up the correct measure life estimate is really, really key here, because it does have a significant impact on your overall cost and the life cycle cost analysis process. All right, I'm going to move into, there's a few more things here for your alternative. So this is the incentives or tax benefits occurring in the first year. So these are upfront tax incentives or deductions or rebates, not annually recurring rebates or incentives. That section is below here for annual incentives or tax benefits. Just make sure if you're looking at tax benefits, incentives, et cetera, that you're capturing the upfront one-off incentives and credits here in this top section, and then the annual below. So this next section is for non-utility annual expenses. So this is maintenance and service labor costs, like O&M, effectively for your alternative. And this is a lump sum of all of your measures. So this includes like annual replacement of worn parts, warranty fees. And finally, the last section in the Form F capital tab is your periodic major maintenance expenses for your alternative. And it's just the same as above. So that's it for this tab. I am sure we have questions.
Yeah, James, we have a few. First one. If a piece of equipment is past its industry standard useful life, but has been well maintained, how should we account for remaining life? And adding to that question, is there an option for calculating useful life based on increasing cost of maintenance versus cost of replacement?
So when it comes to, I think what you're talking about here is the remaining useful life of the existing equipment. Yeah, in commerce, we don't have anything that dictates what that remaining useful life ought to be. That should be part of the audit evaluation as you walk through your systems and equipment to determine on site basically how long that equipment has left before it requires replacement. If you have something that's at the end or beyond its industry standard useful life, but has been well maintained and is still operating, for all intents and purposes, it's not beyond its useful life. What we're actually looking at here is the actual useful life on the ground. So, if you've been well maintaining that equipment, let's say the standard is 15 years and you're on year 25 and it's still running fine, then it's not technically beyond its useful life. In terms of determining what that remaining existing useful life is, that is definitely an engineering judgment piece that has to take place during the audit analysis. And I hope I answered that correctly. Let me know if there's any follow-up or anything on that.
Okay, so another question. So if we have multiple projects, would it be better to do a Form F for each project / building, or would it be better as a whole campus?
That's a really good question. I think it really depends on how you're able to roll up the cost. So as you look through this, I can include additional rows, but at some point it's going to get extremely burdensome for whoever's doing the data entry and trying to review this. I would say if you have different projects, if they're different buildings, particularly, it would be better to have a separate Form F. However, if you're doing this on a campus level, and let's say, for example, you're redoing, say you have a district energy system and the work you're doing on your HVAC touches more than one building and it can be rolled up into one EEM, then it would be possible to use one Form F for a campus. But it really depends on how those costs and how those measures are all kind of rolled together.
Yeah, and I will note also, James, that it's not necessarily practical to be doing the investment criteria for full campus.
Right.
You got to do a level 2 energy audit on the campus, which may be a bit cumbersome.
Yep.
So if you did the investment criteria for individual buildings, tier 1 buildings on that campus, that would be the more efficient way to go.
Yeah, and it really, like I said, it's a lot of this is determined in terms of how you roll up your EEMs. So in this case, it is one building. So it is one boiler, or it could be multiple boilers, but it would be wrapped up into one general upgrade measure. Something to note too, and I've seen this a little bit, is where you have multiple, I'm going to call them sub-measures. So if you have an HVAC unit and you're doing controls, maybe you're doing thermostats, and maybe you're doing something else with that. If you try to roll that up into one measure, you need to make sure that you're setting the cost and measure life to be the same across all those sub-measures that make up that measure. So for example, if you're doing controls and thermostats, maybe your thermostats need to be replaced at a shorter interval. Maybe it's every 5 years or 10 years versus controls, which maybe, I'm just throwing numbers out here, maybe 15 years. If you want to throw that together into one measure, you would need to increase the cost, or at least account for the replacement cost of those thermostats within that overall measure life for the HVAC upgrade. And hopefully that makes sense. Any other questions?
I do have a few more.
Okay.
So measures with lower EULs are modeled as if you are doing a full replacement for the same initial cost at some point within the LCCA? Question.
I might pull that up so I can read it, because I don't know if I completely followed that.
Yeah, it's from Michael.
Yeah, can I chime in?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you were explaining within the lower level, lower lifespan, useful lifespan components within the total, that those will be modeled as if they're getting replaced, or some additional costs are occurring within the total 24 years in this example.
Yes.
And this might be related to some of those other questions about, is that really needed, or can you just increase O&M costs or something? Like how are you required to replace it per that 15-year lighting upgrade within the 24 years, for example? Or is there like maybe we only need to change 50% of the fixtures, but the rest are good, that sort of thing? Like, how is it pretty well defined of how that additional future cost is required to be implemented?
So if I hear you correctly here, what you're looking at is like the individual measures with useful lives different than the study period. And what this has said is, so every 15 years, you would have a full lighting upgrade.
Correct.
So if instead you didn't have, so instead the life was different. So let's say, for example, 15 years. Well, so this is actually for the alternative. So this sets it to repeat. The way the form currently functions is that it will repeat that full cost. If you're looking at trying to discount that, I think you'd end up needing to go into a baseline report and hard enter a cost or cost reduction. So that's something that, Michael, I really appreciate you asking that question. I think that's something I'm going to have to basically record through a video and provide something in another Q&A format in order to spell all that answer out, because it's going to take a little bit of demonstration to show.
Yeah, because like you were saying, for other measures, maybe it's well maintained, and you going forward expect to maintain everything well, and you don't have to do full replacements on, or newer technology. Maybe it's easier to maintain, so it lasts longer, type of deal.
Right.
I mean, not just for lighting, but for other things. But so I'm just curious if, as
Right.
costs are very important within this investment criteria model, like how we necessarily account for that.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note too is that you do not have to have the same life for the baseline and alternative here. So if the lighting upgrade,
okay.
Yeah, so you
Okay.
can change that. So that may address some of your question here. So
I think that would be a way of doing it. Sure.
Yeah. So if your new lighting upgrade, I just set it to be equal just for the sake of an example. With this, there's so many different variables you can kind of tweak and play with. But yeah, in this case, you could set the lighting upgrade to, let's say it's 30 years, just throwing a number out there.
Okay.
And the baseline code minimum obviously may be cheaper, but the life cycle, the useful life on it's lower. So the whole benefit of introducing this EEM is, yes, it's more expensive, but you get longer life out of it.
Sure. Okay. Got it.
Yep.
Okay, James, can you handle a couple more questions?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. If we have multiple options for same piece of equipment or system, i.e. boiler replacement versus air source heat pump, this form seems to be totaling them. is there a way to note when options are non-additive with some of the other options? So I'm assuming this means like alternative path 1 versus 2 versus 3.
So with this form currently, you can't. You would need to have multiple forms filled out to be able to run that analysis effectively. I know if anyone's familiar with the OFM lifecycle cost tool, the Office of Financial Management lifecycle cost tool, there are multiple alternative tabs in this. In this case, it is just a baseline and alternative 1 for Form F. So you would need to have multiple Form Fs in order to crosswalk that comparison.
The next question, is there a way to delay incentives? Example, a utility incentive may occur after a year of measurement verification, confirming savings. So it might be year
Yes.
2 or 3, or is there a preference? Is the preference to put that in the first year regardless?
So something you can do, and I apologize, I didn't go over this, so I really appreciate the question. With these annual incentives or tax benefits, you put the amount, the year that it starts, and this would be actually year format, so 2025, 2026, et cetera. And then years after start year. So in this case, you can delay the incentives. You don't have to put it as an upfront one-off.
Okay, next question. Will Commerce be posting a list of equipment useful lifespans? When will it?
Oh, Luke, I don't have an answer. Luke, I'm not sure if you want to.
Yeah, I'll just state, so once we have our CR 103, for the most current rulemaking we did for House Bill 1390, we'll be able to officially publish these measure lives. So expect it sometime, hopefully in July. Let's see what else. Next question. How is remaining life determined if an energy efficiency measure addresses several pieces of equipment with varying remaining lives?
So if you're dealing with different pieces of equipment, I believe that would have to be broken out as an individual measure. So in this case, the remaining life represented on, so the measure life represented here in this boiler upgrade is basically just for the boiler itself. And if you had a sub piece of equipment or something like that as part of this, you need to have that broken out into different measures. That's the whole key thing with measure life, is that you can't really include a basket of different measure lives into one EEM unless you set them all equal, and that may be increasing the cost of the lower measure life sub-measures as part of that EEM package. But it's much better to disaggregate if you can in that instance.
Okay, next question. And this, we'll do one more after this and let you get moving on.
Yeah.
Any unanswered questions during the presentation today will be responded to in a follow-up Q&A, and that'll also document all questions that we did answer in this presentation. So the EEMs that appear on this tab are the only ones that by themselves are screened to have an individual simple payback less than their EULs, correct?
Yes.
i.e. if there were 5 EEMs listed in Form D, level 2 audit, but only 3 of them had a simple payback less than EUL, those 3 would be analyzed here in the Form F, right?
Yep. So only those EEMs that do have a called positive simple payback are carried into Form F.
Yeah. So if so, wouldn't that generally screen out a lot of capital intensive measures even before getting to this stage? Or is the screening for simple payback calc supposed to look at the incremental costs and incremental savings alternate to versus base?
You're absolutely correct on the last piece of that. The simple payback, and we provided in the investment criteria presentation a few weeks ago an example of that simple payback equation, and it does look at the incremental cost and savings as what you need to use for your simple payback evaluation. So it doesn't necessarily screen out capital intensive measures.
So if the goal of LCCA is to determine cost effectiveness of EEMs, there are EEMs such as lighting measures that can be easily determine the cost effectiveness with a simple payback analysis without doing a full-fledged LCCA analysis. In those instances, can we just get away with a simple payback analysis based on annual cost savings?
So my answer to this, and you can chime in, but it would be no. If you're going through the investment, specifically if you're going through the investment criteria, part of the requirement is conducting simple payback analysis as part of the audit, and then also carrying those cost-effective measures into this Form F. One thing, and I'll get to this once we get to the summary tab here in a little bit, but these aren't just individual EEMs or measures. This is analyzing them all together as an optimized bundle. And you may have instances where you have an optimized bundle that has a really high savings to investment ratio, much greater than 1. In that case, there are some, how to put this, you could implement additional EEMs that may not be cost effective through simple payback analysis, but when bundled with the remaining EEMs that were cost effective, creates an optimized bundle that still has an SIR or savings to investment ratio of 1 or greater. And like I said, I'll walk through this once we get to the LCCA summary tab here in a few minutes.
Another quick question here. So if we are doing a lighting upgrade over 3 years, we would need to break that into 3 line items?
No, I'm not quite sure I understand that. If you're doing a lighting upgrade, that is one measure. The life piece, so the life in years to this is how long that lighting upgrade would last before you needed to replace it again. And then the remaining life piece to this is just how long, what the service life or remaining existing useful life is of the lighting that's already installed on site.
And I will just add that when doing the life cycle cost analysis for compliance through the investment criteria, all measures within this optimized bundle need to be implemented prior to the compliance date. Okay, why don't you, there's a couple other questions, but why don't you keep rolling and we can get to these later.
Okay, yeah, and these next 2 tabs aren't quite as extensive. I knew that the capital tab was going to be quite a few questions on that. So this is your Form F Utilities tab. In this case, printed a few notes here on what these sections are and how you should be including the cost. In this case, so for our example, we have electricity and natural gas, so kilowatt hours and therms. This is your base case. So this is based on your annual utility bill and your annual utility usage for both of these, or whatever it may be, depending on your EEMs. For the alternative, these are your projections. So this will be what your projected annual utility bill and annual utility usage is when the EEMs are implemented. Note that in this instance, the way I set this up is that the cost per unit is going to be the same for the base case and the alternative for your utility service cost. Obviously, with the lifecycle cost analysis, there are fuel escalation rates, which are seen in the tab up here on your far right, that are pulled from NIST 135's annual supplemental. So going into future years, the energy rates will be escalated based on those data tables. For delayed measure, like I mentioned, this is not currently functioning the way it's intended, so we are working on this and want to get a fix out as soon as possible. But if you do have years of delay, this will actually send you a little red notice here. In this case, it says there's no input needed because there are no years of delay. However, if there are, this will also give you a red notice and tell you that you need to include your delayed annual utility savings. And in this case, you would put your years of delay, so for example, 5, and then what the projected energy savings is. And if you look through the PowerPoint presentation slide with the example data, you can kind of see how you would fill that out. You're doing the energy savings projections like you would for any EEM and just including that actual savings cost as part of this. Let's see, I don't think there's anything else on these utilities tab. So I could jump right over to the LCCA summary and then answer questions on both tabs, if that makes sense.
Yes, let's move on for the sake of time.
Okay, time, yep. All right. So this is your summary tab. There's a lot of data here. A few things I definitely really want to point out here is this result at the very top. it will give you a message. It'll tell you if the SIR is greater than or equal to 1. It'll tell you if it's less than 1, but it can also tell you in some instances where the SIR is significantly greater than 1. And what it'll let you know is that, kind of like I was saying earlier, if you have EEMs that were determined to not be cost effective through a simple payback analysis, you could consider including them in this optimized bundle, and you may still get an optimized bundle that has an SIR that is greater than or equal to 1. So it's really an optional piece of, if you want to implement more EEMs, this will allow you to conduct that analysis to make sure that your full bundle is cost effective. A few of the other key data callouts here is it does show you what your net price savings is for the alternative, shows you what your SIR is. In this example, it's 1.05. It'll also give you your internal rate of return, and it'll tell you what the total life cycle cost is. And if you look, this next data table has your cost summary in 2024 dollars. It'll give you what your overall simple payback is through the entire optimized bundle, your return on investment, once again, your annual benefits, and you kind of see all the data that's driven into here. It'll also give you your CO2 emissions reductions over building life by energy source. And I know that there are grants and funding opportunities, other things like that, that sometimes ask for this type of information. So if you are conducting, life cycle cost analysis and you're looking at grant opportunities and funding opportunities, filling out this form will actually help you capture some of this data as well. And I think the remaining tabs, this is an executive report. It's a lot of the same data that's pulled into the LCCA summary, and it's a carryover from the OFM lifecycle cost tool. But if you see here, this will tell you which alternative is the most cost-effective alternative. There's not much more to this. This does include the societal life cost. So it includes the social cost of carbon, is one of the other analysis, and I believe it's included here and in the executive report for the societal life cost. The next two, the baseline report and Alt 1 report, are basically your cost schedule that's being built out from all the data that you're entering into the Form F Capital and Form F Utilities tab. And it's just to show you, and I don't want to scroll too fast for anyone, but it's a pretty extensive schedule that's built out through this. This tab is your fuel escalation rate tab, which, like I mentioned, comes from NIST 135 annual supplemental. And it has the different rates and the assumptions that are being driven into this. And the final one is your CapEx or Carbon X rates as well. I think that's all I had for the tab, so I can start answering questions.
Thanks, James. All right, so I'll pick up where I left off. Does an LCCA need to be conducted on EEMs that a facility has already started? For example, we've identified a lighting project for a client that has already secured funding and signed a contract to upgrade their lighting.
That's a really good question. So I'm assuming, I guess the question here I kind of have back here is that building going through the investment criteria? And is that lighting project that's been identified part of the bundle of EEMs that are being carried forward for that building?
I can chime in. So it's likely having to go the investment criteria pathway, and lighting was actually the only thing we identified that was going to have to be evaluated under the LCCA. Nothing else had a good payback on it.
Okay. Luke, can I get your thoughts on this, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so if no other EEMs kind of pass the simple payback test, and you're going to be implementing that EEM, the lighting EEM, it makes sense that you wouldn't need to do a life cycle cost analysis, because the life cycle cost analysis is really a tool to eliminate measures from a bundle. So if it's just one EEM and you're not going to be eliminating it, it doesn't seem like you would need to do life cycle cost analysis. But we'll follow up with that question in the published Q&A for this meeting. I want to look back at the standard and make sure there's not any specific language in Annex X that would prevent you from doing that for single measures. It's probably not specifically called out in there, but we'll see if we can make a interpretation.
Well,
and
and
publish?
Luke, to add on to that, there is the exception, and I can't quite quote the numbers like you can, but whenever you've developed a list of EEMs and the building owner determines that they're going to implement all EEMs, I believe in that exception that I'm thinking of, it does allow you to omit Form F because you've implemented all identified EEMs.
Yes, that's a good point, James. Let's just confirm that that is still applicable when you've eliminated EEMs by simple payback, because it might be specific to all EEMs identified by the energy audit prior to the simple payback screening.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll follow up in a published Q&A with that. So next question. To that question about the EEMs taking 3 years, what if if large EEMs do take several years to implement? For example, a large boiler project could take several years from start to finish to install. I'll answer that, James. So I think I answered it in the initial when answering the initial question is through the investment criteria, all EEMs identified to be cost effective shall be implemented by the compliance state. The only exception to that is if that EEM is not beyond its useful life. So the existing equipment is not beyond its useful life. You can delay the implementation to the end of the existing equipment's useful life. So if that boiler still had enough years left in its life that you can phase the implementation through delayed implementation, then it can be implemented after the compliance state. You would need to apply for conditional compliance prior to the compliance state in order to honor that delayed implementation. Next question. Utilities tab.
Actually, sorry,
Sure.
if I could chime in to clarify maybe the question
Sure.
with what was asked earlier as well, is that say, you know, this project or this EEM has several phases that need to be done to be able to get the full EEM to be implemented. Say, you know, like it's replacing a boiler or doing lighting, and so the whole EEM has one cost, but you know we need to do phase 1. And that's going to take a year, but then phase 2 will take a year and phase 3 will take a year. And so really the EEM is being installed in 3 different parts. So does that need to be separated to be able to shift the delays? Like, you know, like how do we account for something that might take 5 years to do?
So I think that may depend on whether or not you can see any benefits realized as part of the phases that you're talking about. If it's something where, let's say, it takes 5 years for this boiler upgrade and connect, for it to be fully implemented online and for cost savings to be realized, in that case, it would be a phased implementation. It'd be equivalent to phased implementation. And so you'd have to enter the 5 years of, so in this case, it'd be like 5 years of delay, and you wouldn't actually start realizing the energy cost savings until that 5-year mark, where it's fully online. And like Luke mentioned, you know, the EEMs need to be implemented by the date of compliance, and if not, in that instance, you could apply for conditional. Well, actually, Luke, I don't want to misstate here. For the conditional compliance
only applies
measure and verification. Yeah.
Okay, so then to clarify with maybe the lighting example, you know, like we do a phase 1 lighting, we do see the benefit after year 1. So that in that scenario, it might be more beneficial to show it as 3 different EEMs.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, and then if for the boiler example, if we're replacing, say, we're replacing all the pumps year 1, and then replacing the boilers, or then replacing piping, there could be a part of it that we don't see a benefit, but a part we do. And so the parts we do, we would separate out if they have different end dates for construction.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the clarification.
Thanks for chiming in, Stacy. So utilities tab, since gas or electric gas demand cost savings or increases are not included as inputs, can these costs be captured elsewhere, such as non-utility annual expenses section on the capital tab? These are real savings and costs that should be accounted for.
I'm not sure I quite understand the overall question. Electric gas demand cost savings. I'm not sure I'm following that.
Yeah, Michael, I'm not sure if you want to take off mute to clarify.
Yeah. Some of these measures will, either save or perhaps could increase electric demand costs. And this form is only showing energy, cost or savings. So I was wondering, if demand can be captured elsewhere in the form, perhaps in the O&M section.
Okay. Michael, let me think on this a little bit and get back to you through the Q&A, so that way I can give you a kind of a more fleshed out response of that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Yep. And thanks for the questions. Honestly, I think, like I said, the last presentation we did a couple of weeks ago, like the more questions, the merrier. Like it's really helpful for us to hear the concerns and the issues that you're facing.
Okay, next comment question, James, if you can quickly answer it, that'd be great. We've got quite a few questions to go through in the last 6 minutes here. So the statement was those last tabs went too fast.
Okay, if you're talking about the fuel escalation and Carbon X, these are effectively price indexing or cost indexing tabs or escalation indexing tabs. There's no manual entry. There's no detail that the user actually includes in these. These are basically informational tabs that feed into the life cycle cost analysis whenever you're looking at the discounting and escalation components to it.
Thanks. I was actually talking about the executive report based on report, but I can
I'm sorry.
look at them later. We have 6
I'm
minutes.
sorry.
We should answer real questions.
Okay.
I'll just look at them later.
Okay, next question. If it's possible that something might pass the LCCA that do not pass the simple payback and therefore are not required to be evaluated at LCCA at all, what incentive do facilities have to include those measures in the LCCA, since it may result in them being required to be implemented measures according to the compliance schedule and timeline?
So if I'm reading this correctly, if there's something that would pass the LCCA but not the simple payback, so you conduct a simple payback prior to conducting the LCCA. So only those measures that are cost effective to the simple payback are required to be carried forward into Form F for the life cycle cost analysis. When I was talking about the SAR piece and how you could implement additional measures, even if they're not cost effective, that is optional. There's no mandate or requirement that you do so. The key here is that we're only requiring cost-effective measures from via simple payback analysis from the audit be carried forward to Form F, and we're only really requiring the optimized bundle that has a cost-effective, like equal to 1 or greater than SIR, to be moved forward and implemented. I hope that answered the question here.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of a scenario where like somebody has a boiler that is probably going to need to be replaced in the next 5 years. But if you just look at the simple payback, it has like a 66-year payback. So it potentially might pass the LCCA, but wouldn't pass that initial simple
Gotcha.
Payback.
Well, and that would be a case where if you're doing the simple payback and using the equation that's provided in the investment criteria presentation, I think someone already posted a link to that, but that simple payback calculation includes incremental cost. And for the baseline scenario, if the boiler has 5 years left on it, the baseline scenario should include like for like or code minimum replacement. So that would be calculated in the comparison between the alternative and baseline. Now, if it is something where there's a long 66-year payoff on it, providing that if it is cost effective and it falls within the simple payback period, then it should be implemented and carried forward. But if not, then obviously it would not be included in LCCA.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Donnie, Brian, Donnie included the exceptions to X 2.1 that does allow for you to forego the life cycle cost analysis when implementing all identified EEMs that pass the simple payback. Thanks, Donnie. Next question. If SR...
Look, I think we need to cut it here because we're 3 minutes still. We still have a few other.
All right.
Yeah.
So we have a few more questions here. We'll follow those up in the printed version or the published version of the Q&A.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing and allow Jeff.
we go. Get us back to we left off Q&A. All right. James, did you want to touch on this one, or did you want me to cover this?
I can cover it. These are just general tools and resources. So in this case, it includes the information on the investment criteria with measurable EUI and without measurable UI. So the link there for the Clean Building Performance document library has these documents, and those are the document numbers that you can look for specifically. Also, the link here is for the NIST Handbook 135, which is really the basis of the life cycle cost analysis tool.
Thank you. And then just to remind folks that have been on these calls before, we've got a pretty robust support team, buildings team. You can email us, submit a ticket. I believe Judy did put that. Oh, there it is. For questions or to submit any questions or anything like that, the link is there in the chat. We also, starting this month, will be hosting Clean Building Performance Standards office hours, and they'll run regularly every month, fourth Tuesday of the month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. And thank you, Judy, for also putting that in the chat. So certainly welcome to register. The nice thing is you only have to register once, and you registered for the entire series. So hopefully that'll be able to be a good asset for many folks on this call. And then, of course, we still have our accelerator programs, the Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and then our Smart Building Center. Of course, on our website, we've got our email address, phone number. Welcome to submit there. The subscribe button will get you access to our regular bulletin that usually comes out a week, and have more updates and information. Well, and then just forward thinking on the rest of our summer training series. So of course today was life cycle cost analysis, and then right now we've got decarbonization of district energy systems. Part 1, August 1st, and part 2 later in the month on August 22nd. So lots more to come. A lot more tools and resources that are out there, and we continue to add them more. Okay, so please, as those questions come up, let us know, and our team will definitely do everything we can to respond as quickly as possible. Team, unless there's anything else.
No, we just want to thank everybody for joining us. You'll see the recording in a follow-up email, and the questions and answers that weren't discussed. Have a great day. Thank you for joining us.